Alright, what's going on, guys? Just another quick video on more Saturn symbolism in pop culture, this time in Mortal Kombat, the new Mortal Kombat game that just came out, MK11, Mortal Kombat 11. I have not played the game, but I was talking to my friend and he was telling me about the story, right? He was telling me about the story of the game, and the main antagonist, the primary antagonist of the game, he told me her name, and her name was Kronika. And as soon as he said that, I was interested into looking into it further, and I already knew what the deal was as soon as he told me the name, because Kronika is just, they just put a little female twist on the name Kronos, which is of course Saturn, the Greek Saturn, the Greek god for the planet Saturn. And so a couple things to pay attention to. Again, if I knew more about the story, I could give you like more insight on like how Mortal Kombat's conveying these big ideas. But right now, I'm just showing you the symbolism. And okay, so there she is, Kronika, right? And she's touching the hourglass. She has control over time, so that's something, that's a parallel you always see Saturnian gods having, or Saturnian gods or antagonistic figures having control or manipulation or be able to pass through time. And there's a number of reasons for that, and there's a number of ways you could look at that. But again, I'm just trying to keep this video short because this is stuff that I've said a million times over, and at this point, if you've been watching my Saturn videos, you get the idea. And the main thing to take away from this, okay, her name's Kronika, Kronos. She has control over time. Here's the hourglass, which is obviously a representation of time. And the other key thing is the shapes. They decided to make the hourglass out of, like the glass looking thing that the hourglass is made out of. That's not on accident that they made those hexagons, aka cubes. A hexagon is a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional cube. There's a permanent storm or whatever it is on the North Pole of Saturn in the shape of a hexagon. It's always there. And a cube, it's the same cube that the Muslims walk around in Mecca. It's the same cube that the Jewish people wear on their head, like a tefillin, I think that's what it's called. It's the same cube that's in the UN, the United Nations prayer room, right? So you'll see this over and over again, and the hexagon is the cube, especially if you see it as a black hexagon, which means it's a black cube. If you pay attention to how much in Transformers, the Autobots and the Decepticons, right? They were fighting over a cube in one of the movies, or maybe all of the movies, and Megatron wanted to get the cube so he could. It's just weird that there's great occult significance to the cube, and I'm not trying to fearmonger, but it definitely does usually seem to be used for bad or evil, or represent bad or evil, and it's strongly, strongly, strongly associated with the planet Saturn, which again is, at the very least, a symbolic representation, or the astrological planetary representation of the archetype of Satan. And do with that with what you will. It's funny that the fact that her name's Kronika, the fact she has control over time, and the fact that her hourglass is made out of hexagon, aka cubes, that's all 100% on purpose. And most people won't even think twice about that. I'm not saying I'm trying to keep this video short because this is a very deep topic, but it's right there in your face again. And this is a new game. That's the reason I'm talking about it. And I don't necessarily look for this stuff, man. It has a way of finding me. Maybe I'm manifesting it. I'm not necessarily scared or fearful of these things, It's just something I find interesting, and I know that I'm at least partially right about some of this stuff, and I see it over and over again. Anyways, here's a description of the Mortal Kombat character. Kronika is a character who debuted in Mortal Kombat 11 as the main antagonist. A lot of the times you see literary in games, movies, television shows, books, novels, stories, a lot of the times you'll see a lot of Saturnian symbolism around the antagonist, and it's pretty weird that you know, when Carl Jung, I'll try to give you a quick layout of what I'm talking about in terms of archetypes. And when Carl Jung would talk about archetypes, you could say, like, how many villain or antagonist archetypes are there, right? And you could say one answer for that question could be there's only one. And if you analyze the beliefs, the values, the motivations, the causes, the goals of multiple villains across multiple scenarios, multiple contexts, you'll be able to distill it down and boil it down into like a bare bones fundamental level of what that character is and represents. And there's obvious parallels across stories. Obviously, and you know, you could say there's as many villain archetypes as there are villains in different works of fiction, but that's pretty dumb. Like, that's pretty naive. Like I'm saying, if you, like I just said, if you pay attention to what they're all about across multiple stories, pay attention to the dialogue, right? And that's where really the dialogue is where you'll really discover a lot about their character and what motivates them and why they are the way they are. And so you pay attention to the dialogue and the symbols that are surrounding them. And what you'll notice constantly is that for whatever reason, Saturn is usually displayed as the main antagonistic force in most stories. And in so many stories that it's impossible to deny it or ignore it. And this is just another example of that. And I'm trying to give you guys the bigger picture. And a lot of you guys, if you watch my Saturn videos, you'll know a lot of this stuff already. And I can't say everything that I've said before about the symbolism and what it means and what it looks like in our lives and in history and all that. I can't reiterate that every time I make a video. Otherwise, every video I make will be an hour long. So, you know, you got to go back to my channel and check out the other stuff if you're interested, or research it yourself. And anyways, Mortal Kombat 11, she, as the main antagonist, she is the keeper of time, architect of the destiny of the universe, and mother of Shinnok, the elder god of death and darkness, and Saturn, the elder god of life and light. Due to Raiden's new brutal policy in crushing potential evil forces that threaten Earthrealm, with its apex at the beheading of her own son Shinnok, she sees it as an imbalance between the forces of good and evil and seeks to force equilibrium it, but I think that's just a typo, it by erasing the timeline and rewriting a new one from the very beginning. Okay. These events would set in motion her plan to fix the flow of time, creating a new era and leading consequentially to the past merging with the present. See, that kind of stuff's insane, right? Like, there's different ways you could look at these stories, and in the, like, on the most, like, rational intellectual level, like, you could look at it psychologically and emotionally and symbolically and metaphorically, right? So the totally dumb people, the totally naive people would look at this stuff and say it has no value, it's all mumbo-jumbo nonsense. I think those people that basically don't attribute any value to, like, mythological, religious, literary, symbolic stories, I think they just don't understand. That's why they do that. And then some people, you know, draw the line at, like, the intellectual level, which I was kind of at for a while. Like, okay, these stories are just stories about, you know, human values and human beliefs and psychology and, like, history and patterns that we fall into and intrinsic good and evil that's built into reality and how that affects us and shapes us and stuff, right? You know, I thought of it like that. And then now there's a level where it gets to, of, like, almost literal, like, you're tapping into other dimensions and things. And I just saw a news article on Google that said CERN, right? Like when you start talking about merging the past with the present, CERN, the kind of vocabulary, let alone the symbols surrounding that whole organization, the kind of vocabulary they use when they make a scientific discovery, and the names the names they use for like machines that they build are all rooted in mythology. But the point is, the vocabulary that they use, they just said they just discovered, I saw this last night, they discovered some new thing at CERN, and it opens up a new portal. That's the kind of vernacular, vocabulary they're using to describe what their discoveries are making. It opens up a new portal to world of science, or whatever the hell they said. I don't have the actual article, but it's just interesting that's the kind of language they're using, because that's, if you look at the conspiracy side of CERN, that's sort of like its extreme endpoint, where you start to think that these people are tapping into like another reality. They're going to lift the veil or open a portal to another dimension, and like you're kind of seeing that here with creating a new era, you know what I mean? Again, how I talked about look for consistencies across multiple stories and religions and myths and in history and your life, your own personal life. A lot of the times you'll see literary villains, they're always talking about a new order, a new era, you know, burn down the past and build a new thing. Like, they're always, that's the New World Order. Like, you'll see that. Sometimes they'll just directly call it New World Order over and over and over again. This time they said New Era. It's the same literary tool or piece in the story, you know, the New Era. Anyways, you know, that's just a little description on her. I'm going to breeze through, because this video is already going on longer than I wanted it to. I'm going to breeze through some quick stuff real quick that I've already talked about in other videos. You know, some people say, okay, Kronos, like her name, Kronika, was spelled with a K, not like C-H-R-O-N-O-S. So some people think there's a distinction to be made, and it's easy to confuse the Greek god of time, Kronos, with Zeus's Titan father, Kronos, K-R-O-N-O-S. So easy, in fact, that the conflation has been made for over 2,000 years. The Greeks conflated them regularly, at least according to Plutarch, but both were piled onto Saturn over the centuries. So it's, again, people are splitting hairs when they argue about that stuff, man. As far as I'm concerned, that's what you need to know. Saturn. They're both Saturnian gods. That's what they're doing. Okay? That's what you need to take away from that. So the K-R versus the C-H doesn't make a difference. How I said that the fact that her hourglass was made out of hexagons, cubes, it's all Saturnian. There's the image. That's always there. The South Pole looks like an eye. The North Pole is a cube, hexagon. So again, it's for sure Saturnian symbolism. And I wouldn't necessarily say that if it was just a hexagon, because sometimes hexagons are just there, you know. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but the fact that her name is Kronika, Kronos, she has control over time, which is a Saturnian god, and then you're going to make the hourglass out of hexagons. It's like, I know what you're doing. I'm not being over the top. I'm not drawing connections that aren't there. It's just people that have never thought about this in their lives, and it's so detached from like how they think and what they think about. They can't. They just think it's dumb, or they won't be able to see it. Anyways, El, right? El, Father of Heaven, Saturn, blah blah blah. He's Moloch. He's Kronos. He's Yahweh. El's another name for Saturn. That's important to know. So here you go again. You see El, deity. The Hebrew form appears in Latin letters, standard Hebrew transcription as El, and in Tiberian Hebrew transcription as El is a generic word for God that could be used for any god, including Hadid, Moloch, or Yahweh. So, and right here you see Greek equivalent, Kronos, Israelite equivalent, Yahweh. These people worship Saturn. It's a fact. There's no way around it. It's not even hidden. You just have to do a little bit of research. And I'm going so off topic from Mortal Kombat, man, because I just wanted to show you the symbols, but like people don't see the value in it if I don't cover this stuff. They just think, oh wow, okay, they're referencing something, big whoop, or they won't even acknowledge, they won't even see it to begin with. But Moloch, if you look up how Moloch was worshipped, man, people would sacrifice their children to him. They would put him in a giant... The Canaanites, as in Cain and Abel. If you study the psychology, Cain's like the biblical, literary, maybe a real person, archetypal figure that represents the psychology of Saturn. 100%. 100%. In fact, that's why Tubal Cain, a descendant of Cain from the brothers, the twins Cain and Abel, he was the first blacksmith. The black cube in the UN prayer room is made of iron. That's why it's made of iron. Anyways, I know I'm going off topic. How they would worship Moloch, the Canaanites would worship Moloch, the bull, by putting their children or women, typically children, into a giant burning bowl. They would sacrifice their children to him. Same thing with Kronos. That's how they would worship Kronos. So you see, these guys all represent the same thing. Different cultures had different names for the same force, for the same entity, the same being, the same thing, the same aspect of life, the same aspect of ourselves, however you want to look at it. You know, you gotta think longer than like, oh, superstitious cavemen from the... Most people that view my stuff aren't that rigidly skeptical about it, but there are people out there that just this doesn't register in their brain at all. And the reason this matters is because it still goes on all the time. But you'll notice these different gods of different, or the same god with different names, they're all worshipped in the same way. Why, you know, what does that mean? And that's usually by child sacrifice. And, you know, lastly, you know, there's that. Lastly, here's an illustration of Kronos, personification of time, right? And that's one way you could look at why they sacrifice their children to, because if you think about what time does to kids, it ages them, it stops them from being kids, but it's also like a divorcing of like your heart. Time makes you cynical. It makes you believe that things are meaningless. It reminds you of your finitude and your mortality and your limitations, and it can make you cynical. It can make you resentful, less enthusiastic, things like that. And it makes sense that they would sacrifice, on multiple levels, it makes sense that they would sacrifice children to Saturnian gods when he's the personification of time. Because that's what time does to kids. And the kid in us, you know, if you remember biblical quotes about, like, Jesus saying, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you need to become like children again. He doesn't mean like you need to crap your pants and be irresponsible. He means you need to maintain like your heart through the hardships that come with time. And I have videos of people, of elites of the world, literally bowing down to a giant clock. In modern times, in modern Europe, you know, this stuff isn't gone. They're worshipping Saturn. There's literally no debate about it if you pay attention long enough. So again, you know, you see the hourglass down there, which is what Kronika was touching, representative of time. The Grim Reaper, here's his scythe. That's another way of thinking about him, is the Grim Reaper. Anyways, just, you know, this video went on longer than I wanted it to. Just more Saturnian symbolism in popular games. I don't see any videos out there talking about it, so even, you know, these aren't like really extravagantly put together videos. I just thought I should tell you guys. Maybe you'll keep your eyes open and find more yourself. Anyways, let me know what you think.